All right, let's begin with who the Democratic Alliance is talking to and how far advanced are the talks?
Well, I think things are very much still in the initial phase. I think the parties all had to go back after the election to get some marching orders from their structures. And I think that what has happened to date is talks about talks. There have been meetings. We've met with the ANC and the IFP, for instance. But these are very much in the initial phases. There's been no formal ideas or formal offers put on the table. Yeah. We're obviously waiting to see what happens at the NEC over the next 24 hours. And we hope to have some clarity by the weekend around where things are lying as we go forward. But as I said on Sunday evening, we're going to go into this in a mature, considered way because we believe there's a lot at stake for the country. Yeah. Gone with an open hand, an open mind, and with the level of maturity that I think the situation requires.
So you've mentioned the ANC and the IFP. Correct. That you have spoken to. Is it clear now, John, for your party that you are prepared to go into a coalition with the African National Congress?
Well, what we're not prepared to do is to sit it out. I think that it would be a betrayal of the 3.5 million people who voted for our campaign to rescue South Africa if in the current environment where no party has a majority, to just simply abandon the playing field and allow the anti-constitutionalist forces to dominate those discussions. We believe that we have a number of interests and that we need to look after, including South Africa's national interest. And that is why on Sunday I said that we are open to discussing with the African National Congress, with other parties who respect the rule of law and the Constitution, who seek stability and who are pro-growth, that we must have a conversation in a mature way about how do we see the way forward? How do we see South Africa going forward and winning out of this, given the fact that we're in this state where no party has been given its own majority?
So, as we said in the introduction, there's been lots of talk, particularly around the DA's suitability to go into an arrangement with the ANC. I just want for us to listen for a moment to a few sound bites. Sure. We'll start with the SACP's leader, Solly Mapaila. Let's take a listen.
To support a minority government system with some features of the GNU, excluding the participation of the right-wing forces headed by the DA. In other words, we are supporting a left spectrum of parties to constitute government because we believe that the people of our country overwhelmingly rejected the neoliberal forces and the anti-people, anti-worker, anti-working class organizations headed by the DA. So the DA for us, it's a no-no. And we have said that the ANC reserve the right to engage with any other party, but consolidating the posture from the masses that rejected overwhelmingly the neoliberal and austerity measure-based organizations.
I'm going to also just throw to another person who has commented on this possible arrangement between yourselves and the ANC, and they happen to come from the business section. He is the president of the National Black Caucus, or National Black Business Caucus. Let's just have a listen to what they had to say a little earlier here.
It's led by Tony Leon. Well, Tony Leon is a lead negotiator now, so he's one of the seniors of the DA. We know their background. We know Judge Leon. We know how he sentenced the late, great Honorable Solomon Mahlangu to death for no apparent reason, just because it was apartheid. That's how the DA got started. That's the history of the DA. Helen Zille, who's also a leader of the DA, believes, and has made this very clear and public, that she believes that colonization was good for black people. She has said this before. We've had the interaction. I've argued with James Self over it on another media platform, right? Now, we cannot have people who have that mindset as people who are going to transform the very black people they believe colonization assisted.
So the one is the partner, an alliance partner of the ANC. The other comes from the business world. What is the reception? I know you're unable to give us the texture of what the room is like, But surely there is feedback from people such as Tony Leon about how receptive the ANC is to this possible arrangement.
Well, I said it's early days. I mean, there have been engagements with the DA. They've obviously got an NEC to get through. But I think it's unhelpful to have these types of absolutist positions being put on the table. The reality is no party has a majority. On the 17th of June, we're going to have to form a government in South Africa. There's an election for the president. There's an election for speaker. And that is why these talks must continue. I also think it's quite odd that Mr. Mapaila says that we are anti-worker. The DA has created more workers in this last year than any other party. So we've swelled his ranks tremendously. I think that business needs to be very careful. If the forces of the anti-constitutionalists and anti-market consolidate, business in South Africa is going to suffer very, very badly. We all have pension funds. We all, workers or not, have interest in South Africa succeeding or not. We all have an interest in economic growth. And I think that what we should be doing, rather than taking these absolutist positions, is deciding what is the South Africa that we all want to see look like. I don't think there's anybody who can dispute we don't want growth.
Yeah.
Anybody who says we don't want to see poor people being lifted out of poverty into opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't think there are people who want to say, well, we want to see the economy tanking. I think that we must come together in a time like this to find consensus on the things that really matter going forward. We are committed to growing the economy. We're committed to fighting poverty. We're committed to ensuring that the constitutional order is protected. And we want to work with parties who believe in those things as well.
Yeah.
Because we believe that that is the best environment for South Africa to grow, for employment to be created, and for sustainable livelihoods to be fostered and extended in South Africa.
I'd like to talk about compromises and perhaps non-negotiables from the DA's side. A few high-profile arrests and resignations from the public service have happened in recent times. The latest is the Minister Zizigodwa today deciding to step aside because of the corruption charges against him. Is the DA prepared to serve in a government with individuals who were implicated, for example, in the State Capture Commission of Inquiry? What is it that you are prepared to compromise on? What is it that you simply say, this is going to be too compromising for us?
Well, I think that our approach is a zero tolerance to corruption. And that has to be the foundational aspect of any potential coalition government. You can't go into a coalition saying, well, we're going to tolerate corruption. We're going to allow it to happen. I think the South African people have suffered significantly as a result of the corruption that took place. But the reality is we're also constrained by the party lists. Just as the parties there can't dictate who's on the DA lists, we can't dictate who's on those parliamentary lists. But I think we also need to understand that we're too far away from the finalization of this process to be dealing in granular detail with those types of things. Yeah. I think we've still got to agree, do we want to talk to each other? Can we find a common consensus about what we believe is the future of South Africa? And that's where these things start. You get to the more granular details a bit further down the negotiation. We still are unsure whether the talks will continue. We're unsure what the outcome of the various parties' structures will be. My party has given us a mandate to form a negotiating team, to go out and engage, to look at the options, to indicate the preferences that we would have about how things should work. But until those talks actually take place, I think it's far too early to start speculating about positions, personalities, and the like within any form of arrangement. Yeah. We've got to deal with the first principles before you can move to the next stage. And I think that's where we're at. I think later in the week, perhaps over the weekend, and certainly by Monday, I think we'd start to have a clearer picture about who wants to work together, who believes that the talk should continue, who believes that we need to move towards some consensus by the 17th, that we don't end up with the anti-constitutionalist forces seizing the day and South Africa having to bear the consequences for that.
While I will perhaps agree with you on granular detail at this point it's probably too early to talk about that, but there is stuff that I think you going into these talks, you've got to be mindful of. So here you are, let's assume, here you are, now in this arrangement with the ANC. Are you prepared, for example, to shake President Putin's hand? Are you prepared to take the ANC's stance on the Israel-Hamas conflict and say, Israel, what is being implemented towards the people of Palestine amounts to genocide? Those are very real possibilities that you face.
They're very real possibilities, but again, you know, these are the granular detail that you deal with later down the line. Our position on the Middle East, for instance, is a two-state solution. Government's official position is a two-state solution. We've said very clearly the ICJ is the correct forum for it to be determined whether there is a genocide taking place. And we've said very clearly that we would ensure that whatever the outcome of the ICJ matters, it is respected, because as a party that believes in the rule of law, we believe international law forms part of that. Each party in a coalition doesn't meld and become the other party. That is the whole point of a coalition. It's different individual parties with different issues and different manifestos, and the part of the art of the compromise is trying to find the common ground between all of those. So no, it's unlikely that I would change my position on President Putin. But does that really matter when the broader issue that we should be discussing is, do we protect our constitution as the social contract that exists still between the government and the people of South Africa? Do we regard the rights that are enshrined in that constitution in the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2, as sacrosanct?
Yeah.
Do we believe that an economy that includes private ownership, that includes partnering with the private sector and organized labor, is the right way to go? And I think those are the things that South Africans are looking at to provide the stability and the confidence that our country is going to progress and prosper and not regress and end up in a situation like Zimbabwe or Venezuela or the like. Those are the big issues that I think we should be looking at. And there are red lines going into this. And we said, you know, we will not be part of a government with people who do not accept the Constitution and the rule of law as central to a governance model. It's important that is put on the table, that we respect the rule of law, that we are pro-growth and pro-job creation in the country, not anti it. And I think those are the things that are guiding our positioning as we go into this crucial 2-week period.
I've got 3 quick questions before we end the conversation. The feeling from some quarters is that there will be no real opposition if the 3 main opposition parties decide, for example, to go into an arrangement with the African National Congress. Do you think that a discussion should be had about the state of the opposition in the country, should indeed you find yourselves in government? And practically, how would that opposition function in Parliament, for example?
Well, the opposition function doesn't disappear, and we would see a model where, for instance, you still retained a watchdog role in Parliament, chairs of committees, being able to be active members of Parliament. Just because you have now accepted that you're part of a coalition doesn't mean that you suddenly stop doing the oversight in Parliament. You stop holding ministers accountable in Parliament, that you stop the parliamentary function from operating. Not at all. In fact, that has to continue because the parties have to keep an eye on each other within the coalition. Yeah.
Would you argue, for example, that the Good Party, its leader in Parliament, has done a good job of keeping the ANC government in check while its leader served in the very same government?
Not necessarily, but I mean, if you look at someone like their parliamentary caucus, they've still been putting the questions in. They've still differed with the ANC in the parliamentary environment. And I think that in a coalition, you have to also then have the space to differ where you cannot find agreement. So it's not like you're creating a whole new party. Each party retains its individual identity and its purpose. And that will continue. We will still continue to put parliamentary questions in. We will still continue to put oral questions to ministers. That is how you hold the government accountable. And in this instance, you would be able to keep a stronger eye on each other by making sure that you, are around the cabinet table when decisions are being made. It gives you greater oversight over what is taking place, but also to be constructive in terms of ensuring that Parliament's oversight role is not diminished.
Very briefly, John, the strong views about the DA. This is something that you've worked on for many years, but it's clearly not worked. The DA is seen as a racist party. The DA is seen as a party that looks after white interests. These views are becoming even more stronger now that there is this possibility of a coalition between yourselves. Do you think that at some point you feel defeated, that this is a war you're just never going to win?
No, not at all, because if we were all of those things, we'd be sitting here as a 2% party and we wouldn't be having this discussion. We've got 3.5 million votes, 22% of the vote. That means that South Africans from all communities, black, white, Indian and coloured, are voting for the DA. I think I've said it on your show before. A third of our support are black South Africans. That grew in this election. Places like Khayelitsha, places like Soweto, places like Langa, our vote share went up in this election because more and more black South Africans are realising that a party that is serious about creating jobs, a party that is serious about lifting people out of poverty, is a party that can be trusted. And that's why we're one of the few parties in Parliament previous to this election that grew in this election. We're going back with more MPs, not less of them, because more South Africans from more communities are putting their trust in the DA as the multiracial alternative, non-racial alternative to what has gone before. And it is a time for this new politics now. And I think that the DA is doing what is right by the country and stepping up and say, we're not prepared to just sit back and watch the country fall into by the wayside. We want to be a positive part of writing the next chapter for South Africa, chapter of inclusive growth, a chapter that ends poverty, and a chapter that is a good story of growth and opportunity for more South Africans.
Final question, and I'm sure it should be a very easy one to deal with. If President Ramaphosa is not part of this coalition arrangement, will the DA still be prepared to serve in that government?
Well, it depends who. That's the thing. Bill Clinton famously said, compared to what? Give me a set of names and I will be able to tell you. But we certainly won't be involved in a coalition where we're putting forward somebody who has a cloud of corruption charges hanging over their head or has a history of poor governance and the like. We believe that the ANC's president at the moment is President Cyril Ramaphosa. We have conceded the fact that the largest party in Parliament will put forward the presidential candidate. If that changes, well, we'd have to reassess the situation and decide. But we will always act in the best interests of South Africa and its citizens and the 3.5 million people who backed us in this election in our campaign to rescue South Africa.
John Steenhuisen,
thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.